Welcome back, guys. So if you've been following along in my previous Angular tutorial videos, you have learned a number of different things, but today we're going to be going over unit testing. So unit testing is actually the way that we test a specific function inside of our classes. We want to make sure that that function is operating as expected. Now, before we go any further, make sure you guys hit me with a like, comment below if you have any questions or comments, anything to say. Hit the subscribe and the bell for notifications so that I can continue to make videos just like this. Let's get started. So in our IDE, what we're going to do is, well, first we're going to pull up the terminal. So we want to type in ng test. Once we type in ng test, this is going to iterate through all of the spec files inside of the app folder, and it's going to pull up a browser window for us and run our test runner. So Angular by default is using Karma and Jasmine as the testing framework, and that's what we're going to be using today. So we let this thing spin up, and we notice that a new window has just popped up, and in this new window, as it loads up, it's running all of the tests under the hood, all of the test cases, and it's going to let us know what's going on in the system itself. Is our system good or is it bad? We're about to find out. So the first thing we're going to notice is we have red all over the place. We've got some errors here. So that is not good, but luckily we're here to solve the issue. So the first thing we'll see is there's a character component and a test called the should create test. This is having an error, and then there's a Disney service and the should be created test, and this also has an error. Now, if we read through the error, we'll notice that it's an injector error. So it says R3 injector error, and it's trying to inject the HTTP client module, but there's no provider for that HTTP client that is found. So how do we fix this? The first thing we want to do is we want to open up the spec test for this character component.spec.ts. And inside of here, we're going to look at the before each method, and this has a configure testing module. So in the configuration, we want to add a comma after the declarations, and we're going to say imports with another square brackets because it's an array, and then we're going to type in HTTP client testing module. Oops, not client. Testing module. Great. So once we do this, this is going to enable our test runner to work as expected. Just make sure that yours gets imported at the top. Just in my case, my IDE automatically does this. I'm not sure if it's going to work out for you or not. So make sure that it gets imported up top. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. Now, that being said, we've took care of the character.component spec test. We need to now go into the services, into the Disney.service spec test, or TS file, I should say, and do the same thing. So inside of here, we have a configure testing module, followed by parentheses, and inside of there, we have curly brackets. So inside of these curly brackets, we want to type in imports. That is an array, and the imports is going to import the HTTP client testing module. So once we do that, again, make sure it gets imported at the top for you. But once we do that, if we look at our browser here again, it should rerun the test, and hopefully it'll work for us. And there you go. In fact, it does. So now we have 5 specs. They're all passing test cases. So we have the app component, which has 3 of them. This is default from Angular. And then we have our character component that we created, and finally the Disney service component with a test case for each of them. So this is the default test case that comes with it. Great. So now we're going to actually jump into the code a little bit and get more in depth on what we should be testing and how should we test it. So let's start with the Disney.service.ts. So we know that the Disney.service.ts has one function, and the job of this one function is to trigger an API request, receive a response, and it returns a promise, okay? So we need to make sure that whatever requests we're making, when the request comes back, it is going to return a promise, and in that promise, there should be an object which contains some data. So that is exactly what we're going to be testing for. So if we open up our Disney spec.ts here, so I'm just going to split the screen. Okay. Actually, no, this is going to be easier if I don't. Okay, so in our disney.service.spec.ts file, we have the very, very basic bare bones template of a unit testing test suite, or test case, I should say. So here we have it should be created. So we know the service gets created and it returns truly when the service gets created. So that's what's causing our unit test to pass. But now we want to do a couple of different things. So thing number one is we want to work with the Disney service, and we want to trigger this get characters function. However, we do not want to actually make a request to the real API. We want to mimic that behavior. So that is called mocking. We want to mock the behavior of this service class. So what we need to do here is at the very top, I am just going to create a new class. I'm going to call this the Disney service mock. And this is going to extend the Disney service class. Okay, so now that we've extended the class, we created a mock class out of it, and we want to actually, before we do anything to that class, I'm going to create another const here. I'm going to call this Disney API response mock. This is equivalent to an empty object for the time being. Okay. Perfect. So now inside of this class here, we have this Disney service mock. And what we want to do is we want to get the characters. So we are going to be overriding this get characters functionality. And when we override this get characters functionality, first thing we want to do is we want to actually return a response. And this response that we return, it has to be a promise, right? Because that's what the original function is expecting. So here we're going to say return a new promise. Inside of this promise, we are going to make sure that it has a resolve function followed by a fat arrow. And then inside of here, we want it to return resolve. So we're resolving the promise. And we want it to return the Disney API response mock. Perfect. And now here we just want to define a return type, which is going to be a promise. And that promise is going to be a type of object. Great. So now we basically overrode our get characters method, and we're able to do whatever we want with it. So in this case, we're returning a promise because that's what the original characters function does. However, that promise that we return, we are the ones that's in control of what's coming back. So this is going to help us to isolate our functionality and make sure that we can test every single test case that we want. And in our case, we want to make sure that we test out the fact that it returns a data object or a data property. So here we're going to say data, and data is equal to an array. Let me just go into the website real quick here and see if we can grab, there you go. We're going to grab the data object. We'll just get the first one. The first one will do. That's sufficient for this. Perfect. So I just stuck it in there, and what's happening is now we have an example of the structure that comes back, but we are in control. So we're not actually triggering the API call to receive a response. We're actually mimicking that behavior, and we have control over the response. We have control over everything. So that's pretty cool stuff. So in order for us to actually complete this process, what we want to do is down here in the actual before each function, we have an imports right here. After that, we want to set a comma, and we want to say providers. Okay, so providers is an array, and then it has an object inside of that array. So that first property, we're going to say provide, and we're going to be providing the Disney service. Okay, and I think I can do it without the quotes. Yeah, okay, that's how it is. So the Disney service. However, we want to use a replacement class, and this replacement class is going to be called the Disney service mock. So let me just give you an example of what's happening here. So basically, we have this providers array. So what happens is whenever the Disney service gets called, it's going to be replaced by this Disney service mock. And that's the class that we created here. So inside of here, we overrode the get characters function. So whenever we call that get characters function, it's going to return a promise, just like the original one, with the exception that we are in control of what comes back, which is up here. So this is the data that's coming back. Okay, so now that we have that all set up and good to go, we're going to come down here and create a new test. So we're going to say it should contain a data property. Okay, so we have to make sure that it contains a data property, and in this assertion it's going to be an asynchronous assertion, so I'm just going to put an async before the function here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a comment. We're going to say arrange, and then another comment, act, and then another comment, assert. So this is the order that we want to go in. It's very important that you guys remember to arrange, act, and then assert. Okay, so following these guidelines, what we're going to do here is we are going to first arrange. So how we do that, we're going to say const Disney API equals service. So we're just arranging things. So we're assigning the service, which is the Disney service, to this Disney API local variable here. And now we want to act. So how do we act? What we're going to say here is we're going to say const result equals await Disney API dot get characters. So what this does is we acted on a function. So we just executed the function, we made a call, and we're expecting a result to come back. And then finally, we want to assert. So now we're going to say expect that the result dot has own property of data, okay, to be true or truthy, okay? And then if it's not, and no property of data exists. So what does this do? We just created a brand new test. It grabs the Disney API, it makes a get characters call, and then it tries to check if we have data that's coming back. Okay, so if we look at our test cases now, we are passing, right? Because it should contain a data property, and in fact, it does. So now we're going to want to break it on purpose. So instead of calling this data, let's call this data example. So now it does not contain a data property any longer, and our test should be broken. Perfect. So now that our test is broken, it's saying no property of data exists. So this is the power of unit testing, because if we change this back to data, now we know that our test cases are passing, right? So we may want to do more testing. However, this was just a very, very basic example of unit testing, how to do it, why it's important. Now, I don't want to make this video too long, so make sure you guys hit me with a like, comment below, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. I'll be making more videos like this. I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.